Hello, everyone, and welcome to NLP and the Coronavirus Day 42. And we're on the fourth law from the seven universal laws from a book called the Kybalion by the Three Initiates. We're on law number 4 today, which is polarity. We already did law number 1, which was mentalism. The universe is all mind, it's mental. 2, correspondence. There's a correspondence between all things. So as an example, there's a correspondence between me and you as you're watching this. We're not separate. We have a correspondence, a connection between all of us. Then yesterday was the law of vibration and frequency. And today is the law of polarity. Now, before we get into the law of polarity, Olga asked I thought, a really good question about yesterday's law of frequency, which was, how do you change the frequency of something? Yeah, very good question. And it relates into polarity as well today. So I just want to cover that before we get into polarity. In that, if we wanted to look at how do we change the frequency in ourselves. So, we talked about the fact that emotions, whether they be negative emotions like sadness or anger or fear, and positive emotions like happiness, relaxation, confidence, etc., were the same energy, because everything's energy. It's just at a different frequency. And energy can't be created or destroyed. So if we were to look at like an NLP technique, like collapse anchors, where somebody is nervous about something and they want to feel confident, or if somebody has a negative emotion around an event in the past where they're afraid, as an example, scared, and they want to feel powerful, then, quite often people say, I want to get rid of my nervousness. I want to destroy and get rid of my fear. Well, now we started hearing these laws, we understand that we can't actually do that. So the techniques of NLP, like collapse anchors, if we use that as an example, or timeline therapy, mental emotional release, if you wanted to use the example of going from fear to somebody feeling powerful, what they do is they transform the energy. They change the frequency of the vibration, because it's the same energy, but because of the frequency of nerves, we experience it as nerves. But if we change that frequency, typically increase the frequency, we can turn that energy into vibrating at the frequency of confidence. So NLP techniques enable us to transform or to change the frequency of the energy around a particular event or a particular emotion. If we looked more into the kind of esoteric world, like the world of Huna, for instance, that a lot of you know I teach, then we have an energy system in our body. You might have heard of the fact that we've got 7 chakras, going from the root chakra to the crown chakra. And the energy system in the body, which the hardware for that is your nervous system, your neurology, and these 7 energy centers in the body, this is a transformer of frequency. So the further down is lower frequency, the higher up is higher frequency. So for instance, raw sexual energy, second chakra, would be a lower frequency than pure love, fourth chakra. So if we take the pure raw sexual energy, sexual attraction from the second chakra, and using our mind, law of mentalism, and realize that there is a correspondence between the second chakra and the fourth chakra, then what we can do is we can move the energy from the second chakra up to the fourth chakra. It changes the frequency of the vibration, and we now experience it as the energy of pure love rather than the energy of what you might call like raw sexual energy. Okay? So we've got an energy transformer in ourself. But then there's another question. How do we change the frequency of somebody else? Because it says in the Kybalion that once we understand these laws, then we can actually change the frequency of somebody else. Now, here's an idea I had around this, and many of you know that my background is in electronics. but that's prior to me getting into to NLP. But let's just play with this, because in electronics, we have the idea of what's called a transformer. That's the diagram. That's the diagram for it there. And what we do is we put a AC current in this particular side, AC alternating current, i.e. it's vibrating. And what that does is we put that current in here, and then we get a AC current coming out the other side. And there's no electrical or physical connection between those two sides of that transformer. And these are the things that you've got in the lump in the lead for your laptop. You know, we put here in the UK 240 volts, in the other parts of the world probably 110, 120 volts. And out the other end, a different voltage comes out, maybe 18, 20 volts to run your laptop or whatever it may be. That's a transformer. Now, what we say in electronics is the way that works is there is a resonance between this side and this side. Or if we were to look at the laws of Hermetics, there is a correspondence between this side of the transformer and that side of the transformer. So if we create a change over here, we'll create a corresponding change over here. And it's an alternating current, so it has a frequency. So if we were to change the frequency of the energy, i.e. electricity, going into that side of the transformer, the frequency of the energy coming out of that side of the transformer would also change in correspondence to this one because of resonance. So if the frequency going into here was, let's say, 50 cycles per second, then the electricity coming out of here would be at 50 cycles per second. If we increased the frequency here to, let's say, 500 cycles per second, the frequency of the current coming out this side would also be 500 cycles per second. Yeah. Now, think about this. Think about rapport in NLP. When we match and mirror somebody's physiology, what we literally do is we create a correspondence between us and the other person. Or, in other words, we create a resonance between ourselves and another person. So if we were to create that correspondence, that resonance between us and the other person, and then we were to change our frequency, then their frequency would change too. From an NLP point of view, that's called pace, 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 lead. You pace the person's physiology where they are right now, in, let's say, the energy of nervousness. When you've created that correspondence, when you've created that resonance between the two of you, you then change your state as the practitioner and move yourself from nervous to confident. And that there is, as we've explained before, the only difference between nervous and confident is frequency. What we've done is we've increased the frequency of the vibration, increased the frequency of the energy. And what will happen is the person will also, because of correspondence and resonance, change the frequency that they're operating from. And by leading, that's how we change the frequency that somebody else is working with. Now, let's just take this a little bit further. There is a difference in the frequency between our regular waking state and a trance state, a hypnotic trance state. Yeah. And if we use that pace, pace, pace lead, which for those of you who've done practitioner with me, you've actually done that exercise where you got into rapport with somebody else. And then all you did was, once you got that resonance, once you got that correspondence, once you got that rapport, you changed your frequency by putting yourself into trance. What you found was that they went into trance too. Correspondence and resonance. But interestingly, another name for this process in electronics is the process of induction. And what do we do when we say that we're going to enable somebody to go into trance? We say that what we're going to do is we're going to do a trance induction, or we're going to induce the state of trance in the other person. See all these things, see, this is a correspondence between NLP, hypnosis, the 7 universal laws of the Kybalion, and electronics. That's the law of correspondence, okay? So now let's take another step forward to law number 4, polarity. And what law number 4 of polarity said was that the universe is created in polarity or duality, or another way of looking at it would be in dichotomies, and that everything has a pole. In general, what we'd look at that as being is there'd be a positive pole and a negative pole. Now, and then generally in esoterics, and even actually in electronics, the positive pole will be taken as being the masculine, and the negative pole will be taken as being the feminine. So let's just talk about polarity for a moment, because of those words, positive and negative, positive pole and a negative pole. We each in of ourselves have a positive pole and a negative pole. If you like, we have a male pole and a female pole, because that's a duality, a polarity, a dichotomy. Yeah. And equally, both male and female have a positive and a negative pole. The male will be taken as being the positive pole, and the female would be taken as being the negative pole in general. And I was teaching this at a conference, and somebody actually said, so are you saying that feminine energy is negative? So let's just deal with that one right off the bat, okay? So here's a regular battery. Yeah. And the battery has a positive pole and a negative pole. So if we want to use the law of correspondence, it has a male pole and a female pole. But you don't go around with a battery saying that's the good end and that's the bad end, because it's not about good and bad, even though that is a dichotomy, that is a duality, and that is a polarity. We don't go about making value judgments about a good end and a bad end of a battery. It's just the positive pole and the negative pole. Now, here's something else that's interesting that unless you're into electronics, unless you're into electricity, most people wouldn't realize this. But, a general assumption would be that the energy would flow from the positive pole to the negative pole. But that's not what happens. What actually happens is the energy, the electrons, flow from the negative pole to the positive pole. Yeah. If you looked at another duality, another dichotomy, another polarity, you would have the polarity of active and passive. So what we've actually got here is that the negative pole is the active pole, and the positive pole is the passive pole. So the feminine pole, if you like, feminine energy is active. The male, masculine energy is passive. Yeah. So the energy comes from the feminine, the negative pole, and moves to the positive, masculine pole. Yeah. Now, here's the other thing, though, with this. If there isn't a positive pole, the energy can't move. So therefore, there is no voltage, there is no current. You have to create a circuit for the active to be drawn to the passive. And, we can look at that from a male and female perspective, but we can look at that from anything in the universe, because what the Kybalion is saying, what law number 4 is saying, is that everything has a polarity. But equally, it's saying that a polarity or a dichotomy is not black and white. It's actually it's a continuum. So you've got a continuum from high voltage, if you like, positive, and high voltage, negative, and everything in between, including going through zero. And that's with all of those poles. They're all sliding scales, hot and cold, night and day. Yeah, they're not one or the other. They are a continuum. Okay. Now, the other thing that it mentions in Kybalion, I think a lot of people will go like, what? Is it says, whatever something is, it also isn't. And when you read that for the first time, you might go, what? If something is something, how could it also be not being something? Okay. So this is around dichotomies. Everything in the universe is created through a dichotomy, a duality, and therefore a polarity. So if we were to look at this, my 100% legend coffee cup here, then what we've got is, where's the dichotomy here? Well, for the coffee cup to exist, there needs to be a boundary around the coffee cup which separates the coffee cup from the rest of the universe. Make sense? For this to actually exist, there needs to be a boundary that separates my 100% legend coffee cup, which is some presents from a students in a training we did a year last January. For this coffee cup to exist in my experience, or in my mind, law of mentalism, then I have to have created a boundary around it to separate it out from the rest of the universe. So then, what is the dichotomy? The dichotomy is the coffee cup and the rest of the universe minus the coffee cup. That's the dichotomy, that's the duality, and that's the polarity. Yeah. And for this coffee cup to exist, that dichotomy has to exist. If it didn't exist, if the boundary between the coffee cup and the rest of the universe were to disappear, the coffee cup would disappear. Because there'd be no there'd be no duality, there'd be no dichotomy, and there'd also be, therefore, no polarity, and it would disappear from our experience. So, how we use that, for instance, particularly in our master practitioner of NLP training, is we talk about how can we have the boundaries on a presenting problem disappear. Because for us to have an experience of there being a presenting problem, there has to be a dichotomy, there has to be a duality, there has to be a polarity. So for instance, if somebody had a presenting problem of anger, for that to exist in their neurology, which we already know, law of correspondence, as in the microcosm, so in the macrocosm, for us to be able to perceive anger outside in the macrocosm, we must have anger inside in the microcosm. And for us to have the perception of that existing, there must be a dichotomy. And the dichotomy is anger and everything that anger is not. That's in this thing called anger and the entire universe minus anger. So there's a boundary around that creates that dichotomy. If we were able to have that boundary disappear, then the dichotomy would disappear, the duality would disappear, the polarity would disappear, and in our experience, the anger would disappear. That's a way of applying these universal laws to things like NLP, to timeline therapy, to mental emotional release, to Huna, to hypnosis. Is that what we're really doing? Are we collapsing, if you like, the duality, the dichotomy, the polarity, and therefore in the person's mental universe, the presenting problem disappears? So there we go. That's our Kybalion law number 4, polarity. I think you're probably starting to realize that these things are beginning to flow, and they're beginning to. They're not separate laws. They're integrated in actual fact, and you can't just pick one law and make that law work in isolation. The closest thing probably in the personal development world to the law of correspondence would be the law of attraction. That is really the correspondence, But what they did was they took the law of attraction, or the law of correspondence, and said you could use it in isolation to be able to achieve all your goals. And it doesn't work in isolation. You've got to use all of the laws added together, integrated together. And I think we're already starting to realize how, even just with the 4 laws we've covered so far, how they integrate together, and how, using the law of correspondence, we can then find the correspondence between these 7 laws in electronics, in our relationships, in the universe in general, in NLP, and all of those kind of things. Okay, so that's why I think this is so useful, so powerful in shifting our own thinking. As I said, I hadn't read the Kybalion for a good number of years, and I'm really enjoying reading it again. So thank you for being with me and sharing this with me, because, I'm vibrating at a different frequency than I was when I read the book, let's say 25 years ago. I wouldn't have seen the correspondences between electronics and all those kind of things and NLP when I first read it. So I'm getting huge amounts out of this. And because of the law of correspondence, then so will you. So wherever you are in the world, I love you lots, and ho-we-ho.